right, welcome to this forum conversation about Cardano, Voltaire, and in particular, CIP-1694. And we'll be going into that in a little bit of depth today, hopefully have some conversations with the community around what governance means and in particular what the CIP is stating. And we would like to focus today on really coming together as a community and asking what questions should we be asking about this CIP? What are the things that we're concerned about? What are the things we want to ask questions about to make sure we're having the right conversations? And today we'd like not to come up with solutions to these things, but really make sure we're aligned as a community, that we're asking the right questions and really get into it and see, are we talking the same language? Do we have any concerns? Things like that. And it's not really a solution finding thing. This is the beginning of a conversation. So these conversations will continue. And we're recording this so that people who aren't able to join today can catch up and hear all the conversation that we're having. And since we do have a number of people here today, we will do a breakout room session later and have a couple of different breakout rooms. We're going to probably break out into an SPO room, a constitutional committee room, and a DRep room, just to have separate conversations around those three specific constituents of what's being proposed in the CIP. And then we'll come back together in the main room and discuss any takeaways that we had from those groups. And then we'd love to leave the last 10 minutes or so to come up with some most elegant next steps so that we know what are we going to do next, how are we going to carry this conversation forward, and are there any concrete things that we want to do. And to start things off, we thought we would do an overview of what CIP-1694 is about. And I see that Stephen just joined us.
And even before going into CIP-1694, because I think there's a fair amount of people maybe, and I would love to play the dummy. What the fuck is a CIP? What is this all about?
Does anybody want to answer? I can give the high level, like CIP is a Cardano improvement process proposal. And these are things that are proposed from the community. It goes through a series of conversations and refinements and things before they actually turn into changes of how parameters are set on the chain or how we set different things. And there's a number, like the whole NFT stuff is defined through some KIPs or SIPs. And how is that pronounced actually? Is it KIP or SIP?
SIP, I think. I'm just going off what Charles says, but it's SIP.
SIP. Okay, we'll call it SIP for here. And yeah, does anybody else want to share any deeper definition of what a SIP is and how they're used? Tommy?
Yeah, absolutely. So a CIP or SIP, some have strong opinions on how to spell it, pronounce it. It's in some way just a way to discuss stuff, right? So it's just a process to discuss, like a forum, but a more formal, geeky way to come to solutions, I would say.
Einstein.
I'll just add that CIP-1 describes the process. So this formal process Tommy is talking about. But yeah.
Nice. And maybe if people have access or time, you can drop a link to CIP-1. So maybe people can take a look at that offline when they're interested. And there it is. Thank you. All right. So that's a CIP. Do we want to get into the definition of CIP-1694 in particular? I see that Stephen has joined us. You gave a very nice overview at the after town hall session earlier this week. Do you want to give us a quick overview today?
You put me on the spot, Norris. Yeah, I mean, well, I can't really not quite at the moment. I'll just say, pick up on the CIP process that Tommy refers to, which is quite interesting because after reading because read through the specification, and maybe in sort of 5 or 10 minutes when I sort of like process that, I could sort of give some more in. But what does occur to me, I'm now looking through how the specification as a GitHub commit is being reviewed on GitHub. Okay, and that is done, as Tommy says, through a SIP process. Okay? But also it's done through the GitHub a pull request process. So it's interesting that a document here has been treated as code. So, and it's a proposal for governance that's being treated as a code review. Now, I'd just like to keep that in mind. Okay, is that appropriate? Okay, that's one thing. And also there's some assumptions here being made. I've discovered, like, for example, an obvious one is constitutionalism. Okay, so I'm not saying constitutionalism is wrong. Okay, I'm just saying that needs to be right at the top. Okay, we are designing a governance system based on constitutionalism. Okay, you need to say that. You need to state out your first principles, and that is not a development principle. That's a political decision. Okay, so there's a kind of weird tension here between what are perceived to be technocratic or development decisions and what are governance decisions. Okay, and so a great deal more attention needs to be given to how to where that barrier is. When are we designing an on-chain system that is just has technical issues? Okay, and when does that cross over into more political decisions or discussions? And that's partly a communication issue, and it's partly a technical issue. So I'll just say on that. I'm not sure if I answered your question or anything, Nori. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
You're muted, Nori.
Okay, thanks, Stephen, for that introduction. And yeah, that's why we're here, is to discuss what questions should we be asking about the KIP, about the process to come up with a system of governance for Cardano. And really ensure that we're taking in the broadest perspectives and the most diverse opinions and thoughts around this. Because if we're building governance for something that we hope is a financial backbone for the entire world moving forward, I think we need to be as inclusive as possible and make sure that we're not just blindly copying things that came before, because we have a chance to do something better and different. Should we play the video that was played at after town hall? So this is just from QA-DAO. It's a CIP-1694 summary and overview video. It's 5 minutes long, so it might be a good introduction to what we're talking about here today. So I will play that video now. Yep.
It's time for corn and coke and
platform,
watching cool stuff.
Currency that was developed to provide a more secure and sustainable infrastructure.
Let me get the volume up. All right.
Cardano is a blockchain platform and cryptocurrency that was developed to provide a more secure and sustainable infrastructure, decentralized applications, and digital assets. It is based on the proof-of-stake consensus algorithm and utilizes smart contracts, which allows developers to build decentralized applications on the platform. The Voltaire era of Cardano aims to make the network self-sustaining by adding a voting and a treasury system. This will allow network participants to use their stake and voting rights to shape the future development of the network. In order to achieve these ends of greater decentralization and sustainability, Input-Output Global has drafted a Cardano improvement proposal, CIP-1694, that outlines an on-chain decentralized governance mechanism for Voltaire. This presentation by Quality Assurance DAO, QA-DAO, is a summary of CIP-1694. QA-DAO is a community organization that provides the following services: documentation and communication, auditing and oversight, governance and community support, facilitation and co-production, and project management and automation. You can support our work by delegating to our Cardano stake pool QA subscribing to our YouTube channel, and following us on Twitter for the latest announcements. In November 2022, a Cardano improvement proposal, a CIP, entitled An On-Chain Decentralized Governance Mechanism for Voltaire, was submitted to the Cardano Foundation's CIP's GitHub repository. From the outset, community feedback has been sought and encouraged by both IOG and the Cardano Foundation on the Voltaire CIP. What is a Cardano improvement proposal? A CIP is a formalized design document for the Cardano community and the name of the process by which such documents are produced and listed. The CIP process itself was defined and agreed in CIP-1. What is CIP-1694? In summary, the abstract for 1694 proposes a revision of Cardano's existing governance, the blockchain. 2 new fields would be added to on-chain transactions, governance actions and votes. Any Cardano user will be allowed to submit a governance action, which will then be ratified by a constitutional
What's up, my fellow niggers? Anybody trying to get raised?
Representatives, DReps, and stake pool operators, SPOs. The ratified actions will then be enforced on the blockchain through a set of rules. ADA holders can register as DReps or SPOs to either represent themselves or to delegate their vote, with the voting rights based on the amount of ADA they hold. The specification. The current specification draft, as of February 2023, documents the following. The Constitution, a brief outline of intent, and the Constitutional Committee, an overview of the combined governance group and its remit. Governance actions, the different types of on-chain events that are governance actions. These include a motion of no confidence, new constitutional committees and or quorum size, updates to the Constitution, hard fork initiation, protocol parameter changes, and treasury withdrawals. Votes, detail of a vote transaction, the life cycle of on-chain governance states and epoch boundaries. Delegated representatives, DReps, which provides detail on DRep registration and retirement certificates, and a vote delegation certificate, a new stake distribution for DReps, and changes to the existing ledger rules. What motivated this CIP? The motivation behind CIP-1694 is to address shortcomings in the existing Cardano governance mechanism, which modifies parameter values, including hard forks, and transfers ADA between reserves and the Treasury. These shortcomings include no room for active participation of ADA holders, transfers from Treasury can be hard to track and lack transparency, hard forks are not sufficiently differentiated from other protocol changes, and there's no clearly defined common vision or guiding principles. But what next? Discussion and review of the specification is encouraged across the Cardano community in order to inform appropriate revisions to this governance model. QA supports this objective by contribution to the broad communication and explanation of the specification with this summary and subsequent presentations. Full documentation of this presentation is also available on QA-DAO's Ecrasis Gitbook. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, that was a short 5-minute intro. Yep. And thanks, Stephen. He put some links to documentations, and we also put some links in for the CIP itself in chat. So go ahead.
One mention to the video. Hey, Steve, you have an amazing calm voice there. This is really, really, really cool, I have to say.
It's all the drugs I'm taking, Felix.
More of
Can you share some drugs with me?
Nice. So with that, I'd love to open it up to the floor to just kind of start some conversations here. I think Stephen dropped a few opinions in the beginning around how we should start, the things that we should be thinking about. What do people think? What are the questions we should be asking as we enter into here and start analyzing the CIP and talking about it? Einstein.
I'm really excited about this, and I've tried to make like a pass every day reading through it and trying to get questions every time I read it. So the following is like a small list of questions I have currently. So the Treasury, what happens with Treasury withdrawals when there's a vote of no confidence and all ratified votes will be pulled back? This is one thing we need to understand better. The Treasury, what happens if you send a Treasury amount to a project you're also a part of, like as a voter? Does this have implications like tax, ethical? This is something we should consider. The size of the quorum, this is something that will be decided off-chain. And it mentions it could be entities, not only persons. So should there be some guidelines on how these entities will form for a constitutional committee? And what will we accept in an off-chain voting process for these entities? The constitution itself, there's only a hash. What happens to the distribution of the constitution? Is it decentralized distributed? Is it only on the blockchain? I want to know more like how we safeguard the constitution itself. Proposals. Are there spam limits? How large should this deposit be? Could we have like a spam of thousands, 10,000s of proposals, so much that we are having trouble reading through all of them? Maybe we should think a bit about this proposal process as well. Yeah, I think that's enough from me for now. But yeah, it's so good to go through all of this.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, those are all really great questions. And even beyond the spam question, as we grow and scale to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, that's naturally might happen. So how do we scale the process as it grows and starts to encompass more and more people? Yeah, I think those are all great questions. And just from chat, there's a few that are pulled in just talking about the question around constitutionalism in the first place. And that might be great to talk about as well. But yeah, these are all great starting points. So open up the floor. Thorsten, welcome.
It's probably still a very superficial thought which I had, but kind of based on the work which we did for the DReps in the context of Catalyst, what kind of became clear is that a representation in a certain form can always lead to a concentration of power. And what was striking me is that for the SPOs, as also for the DReps, the parameter to be nominated in itself is actually kind of ADA holding. So that is already kind of giving a kind of implication that whoever kind of concentrates volumes of ADA by a sudden has to control over two relevant areas potentially. Yeah. And that in itself could then lead that the third element, constitutional committee in itself, can become unfunctional in its own rights and means. So what would happen if someone would have a substantial amount of power concentrated behind them, either through building a party, collaboration, whatever, or voting power? Yeah.
Thanks, Thorsten. Those are all great thoughts. Felix, did you want to add to any of that?
Yes, additional to it, I'd say CIP-1694 tries to, or aims to solve some very specific, let's say, level ups or improvements for the current system of Cardano governance. And I see a little risk that everybody takes it for granted already to say, yeah, okay, let's go for CIP-1694 and let's figure out what doesn't fit there, rather than saying, hey, wait, is this actually the most effective solution, and what alternatives could be to CIP-1694 as well?
That's a really good point. And a good question to ask is, are we only considering 1694 as the way forward of governance and modifying it and improving it? Or is the floor open for other people to propose alternative forms of governance, and is that part of the process? Zoe, and then Kenrick.
Yeah, I also wanted to add two questions. One is from the chat from Nicholas. What paper is CIP-1694 based on? And my question would be, how are CIPs in general kind of agreed / voted / selected? That would be my question.
Okay. I see Tivo putting those down. Thanks. Kenrick, and then Steve.
Everyone's asking great questions. And I like particularly this thought of, the CIP-1694, I think, is coming, as I understand it, and was proposed by IOG and the Cardano Foundation. So part of maybe our response is to work within that process, critique it, try to shape what that comes out like. But maybe people in the community should be putting forward alternative proposals of what Cardano governance would look like. And that leads me to a question. I don't know if there's time within today's discussion, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about how Sworn governs that community. And we've all participated in your town halls, and I feel a bit of a participant in Sworn, but at the same time, I've not been involved in the administration of it. And I'm kind of curious how you all are administrating yourselves and whether there's any lessons learned from that would guide administration of the larger Cardano community.
Thanks, Kenrick. I think those are really good questions. Steve.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to stick in a suggestion, and I'm not academically. I don't have the academic vocabulary to really express this well, but the reality is 1694 is real, right? They're not kidding around about this, and there is that cult of personality that's going to, just go along with whatever Charles says. And this is not any kind of critique on 1694. I think that the various regulatory adversarial actors that blockchain is facing right now, particularly in the US, has to be taken into account. And, I think that on that level, the big three are serious about getting governance going. I think if we take that as a realistic probability that 1694 gets voted in, then what this group and other groups in the Cardano community, and I will say that, like everybody in here, I have the utmost respect for everybody who's here, partly just for showing up on a Saturday afternoon and being willing to talk about this, but also for all the work that everybody does. And I've been reading the thread on the proposal assessors Telegram channel, and it's been a great discussion over the last day or so. Really, really valid points from everybody involved in it. And I think that what I would like to see from this part of the community, that is not the big wheels and not the people that the big three don't talk to, right? That's a lot of us, right? I don't get DMs from Charles, and I don't think anybody else here does. Right? But what we should be focused on, I believe, is to get our foot in the door on this 1694 process and the discussion surrounding it, to make sure that all of these communities who are necessarily not ready for this step, right? It takes a lot of balls to come into these kind of meetings or to get involved in the SIP process discussion thread on 1694, right? You've got to have a lot of confidence to get involved there. And I don't think that people in the rest of the world that are just now building their Cardano communities are there yet, right? They aren't there collectively in their collective thought, let alone their collective organization. And I think that we need to make sure that whatever's going on with 1694 leaves the door open for these communities. And I don't know how to do that, but I think that we should be discussing.
There you go. Sorry for this.
Thanks, Steve. I think those are all really good reflections. Nicholas, welcome to the conversation.
Hey, Nori. Hey, guys. I hope you're all doing great. What I always wondered with CIP-1694 and, the feedback that's being collected right now in the various channels, the discussions that happen, at what point will it be, I don't want to say enough, but at what point or who decides when the community is ready and who decides when it will actually get implemented? When does it happen? When, I don't know, IOG, CF, and Emergo just vote for it with their existing Byron keys? Or I think that's something we also really need to deeply think about.
Those are really good points. And I think existing systems of parliamentary procedure and stuff have mechanisms to say, okay, we've talked enough. I want to move that we vote, or whatever it is. I think those kind of decision-making points may be important to include in the conversation so we don't endlessly talk about things. That's a good point. Head Elf.
Good morning, all. I love the censorship on Quasar, Felix. That was beautifully done. First rule in the Constitution should be no stopping of recording. Quasar, your points were salient as usual. I can't help but think that the big three, as he put, have the budget to start the work. And in a way, it's up to us as the community, as catalysts, to chew it over, refine it, debate it, and shape it. And as we work on this Constitution, whether it's the current version or a different iteration, I believe, and especially with what's going on in the US right now, I believe decentralization governance may be the goal that everybody somewhat has in sight. And it reminds me that last year, I think it was November at Scottish Fest, the big three rolled out a study at Edinburgh. And I don't know how far along that is, but that is all about measuring and what decentralization is about. And my suggestion, or what my thoughts are, would be to take that study when it comes out and meld it into this document somehow. What actually is decentralization, and what will make up the best constitution for this community that, Nori, as you said, is here to shape the world. Einstein, if I understood correctly, you're worried, your concern is about being inundated with proposals that may overwhelm the system. I don't know if many of you are involved at all with Osmo or the COSWAM ecosystem. They have a very good system for putting forth proposals. Anybody can do it, but you have to put up some money. You have to put some gelt up. And there's 4 voting possibilities: yes, no, abstain, and abstain with veto, which means if you lose that, you lose your money that you put up. So it makes people think twice before just putting up malicious or loose proposals. So that may be something we consider here also, a voting system along those lines. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day. Don't cut me off, Felix, please.
Usually, I really not try to cut off people, more the opposite.
No, I know. I was just playing with
Thanks, Tommy. Einstein.
I think all of this ties into something I have been curious about a long time. Like I feel the community is lacking like a central platform where we put all of the different videos, all of the different communities discussions, all of the different forums. Like we all see that Twitter can be good for discussions on small topics, but it can also be a terrible place to form an actual opinion and see what everyone means about the topic. And we could also put there like, what can we learn from the other communities, what has already done in the past? And finally, because we're discussing like, first, is this a good idea or not? I think also we should discuss like, how do we evolve the CIP? Because the CIP also opens up the possibility we should evolve it. And I feel all this ties into the fact that we need like a common platform where all of the different groups, like all of the great communities like Swarm, the Catalyst, the SPOs, everyone really has a platform to discuss and aggregate data about voting.
Thanks, Stefan. And then Zoe.
Hey, everyone. Great conversation. And Einstein, it sounds like you're talking about a Cardano parliament of some kind where everyone can get together and talk about these things. And there's a public process for it to be recorded. But again, the point that I'm been rolling over in my head a lot is, we can amend things, we can add new SIPs as a community, but yeah, when we're talking about, we've given them a name here, the big three. When we're talking about the people who hold the balance of power and that the community is listening to and the community is working with their knowledge of it, what are the checks and balances? These are all, legacy system words that I'm using. And I think building a vocabulary and a place for this vocabulary to live, where the community can look at it, read it, understand it, that's going to be very necessary in this process. So I think that that's something that we should be talking about and thinking about as a community, is what words are we using? And Nori said it right at the beginning. So yeah, that's sort of the crux of my point, what I'd like to talk about today. Thank you.
Stefan. We have a bit of a queue now, Zoe and then Tommy.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to also quickly respond to that communicational issue, because I took a little break from it, but I am in my studies of like language, linguistics stuff, literature, not communicational science, but just language in general. So I kind of paid special attention to how Cardano, Catalyst, whatever, communicates and stuff, and how that works. And I thought a lot about kind of inaccessibilities of platforms and stuff, and also formats. For some people, it's just easier to yeet something on Twitter. For some people, they prefer to make an awesome forum post, and other people like Reddit, or others find their homes in Telegram. That's super fine. And I think if we want to kind of step up our game in communication as community, not necessarily to always talk directly to IoT to have an impact, like I kind of feel we have to connect as a community over platforms. Our minds are kind of the nodes in that. So, and nobody is just on one platform. So I feel like it makes sense to kind of start cross communicating and be a way of connection. Like if somebody says something awesome on Twitter and you're having a Telegram conversation or something, you can hint to that or kind of summarize it or something. And I feel like that's super necessary, and that will bring us forward, because pushing everything into one platform will just not work, I think. And who's gonna keep the overview, That's also what the fuck. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Zoe. I think those are good points. Like we are talking about decentralization and decentralized governance and stuff, and it always is interesting when we talk about centralizing different parts of that. So I think that's a worthy conversation. And maybe also just looking at chat, some of the stuff that came up was around Sure, everything can be transparent and open, but if there's a huge volume of information or it's highly technical, then people may not be able to consume that in a easy way. So that alone may prevent them participating. So there may be a place here for different functions of governance that help clarify, simplify, communicate, educate even, and that may be something that should be added to the thinking process. Tommy.
Yeah, I have a long list technically of questions that are not answered, but just a few. And I'm not sure if we are supposed to add that to the board ourselves, Nori, or should I send them to you?
I think you're free to jump in and add stickies if you want. It's not.
Okay. So of course, interesting. What should go into the constitution? I mean, that is so obvious, but also how are we putting in? How is it machine readable? Because from my understanding, we are in some way limited to things that you cannot interpret, right? So there's no room for interpretation if we put things into something that should be machine readable. So we will end up with, I have no idea, 45 billion ADA. This is the maximum, stuff like that. Or you can change certain parameters only by 20%, or maybe there's a limit on things. So that is a whole discussion on its own. Then there's still this loophole of stake pool operators, or maybe also big entities that run stake pools, like exchanges, and they're not really keen to see a lot of changes because that means work for them. Let's say there's a parameter change in K, they would need to spin up nodes and all of that. So just let's block all of this. And if the stake pool operators would decide to block an update or something, then everybody else can vote on things, but it has no meaning because they need to update the nodes and run the system. And if the delegators then decide in the right way, that will be a nice experiment. So this is really a juicy question. Then also what's not clear is is there an incentive system for the DReps or how does that work? Because it's not in the CIP directly, but I always assumed that it works like from the voting rewards of the delegated votes, they get a cut of that or something, but I could be wrong. And the last one is, that this is also connected to that. So the mechanism for these DReps, it's similar to how the stake pool operation or the delegation certificates work, right? So you put something on chain, a certificate that points to something, and then your voting points to DRep. So that does not scale very good. Okay, so we cannot have 100,000 or 1 million stake pools because also of this problem. And I really wanted to see somewhere what people expect on how many DReps do we have or will we get. Are we talking about 5K or 10K or maybe 20K? But I think then we could end already at the higher end of that. But this is just assumption of me. So I don't have any performance calculations or whatnot. Yep.
Thanks, Tommy. Lots of interesting points there. I really like the question of being able to make things machine readable, because that opens up a lot of interesting stuff. Just to put a kind of a shout out, last week at Pacific Town Hall, Joe Allam presented a project that she was working on through Project Catalyst called Regulation as Code. And they were trying to take different jurisdictional legislation and put them into metadata so that they could actually create software to do different things with it. And they may have some really strong implications in what we do here too, if we're thinking in that direction. Yeah, so thanks. And yeah, just as a point of clarity, since you mentioned at the beginning, the Miro board's open. So I believe anyone, if you want to put states in, feel free and add stuff directly there. Evo.
Yeah, the way I see this constitution is basically a rule book, which constitutes like three main parts, which are like who is going to do the voting, who is going to look all of that stuff up, what people are proposing, then how the voting mechanics works and all that data required to do that on the chain. And then like this DRep position, which are basically selecting the committee members. And from I kind of changed the question from the CIP process itself, but for me it would be who should be included in the constitutional committee bootstrap mechanics. And whoever we kind of decide, and I like the idea of like Tommy's basically, why don't we test? Why don't we just launch it? We have Project Catalyst, a lot of active members are just waiting for another launch. We could get people together, ask them who wants to be DRep, they get that test weights, and then who wants to be community members. Hey, now you can select community members. You see all the participants. Now decide how many people you would want to be community member, because we have, one thing I didn't mention was like the governance actions we can do. And so all this stuff we are asking about, we could technically take the question and answered it through this rule book of the constitution mechanism itself, and see where the shortcomings basically are and how much overhead it actually adds to create this kind of method of making decisions. Thanks.
Thanks, Timo. And yeah, I think that's a great point. And it also gets into the whole scalability thing. How do we scale beyond a few hundred people to thousands to hundreds of thousands? And can we build a system that encompasses all of that, or will it break? And will we have to start over when it gets big enough? Great questions, Nicholas, Einstein, and then Thorsten. And then maybe after Thorsten, we'll take a little bit of a 5-minute break, because that'll probably take us to the top of the hour. And then when we come back, we will do some breakout rooms. But yeah, Nicholas.
Thanks, Nori. And yeah, I totally agree with you, Tio. I mean, when it comes to CIP-1694, I think governance in general, right? Will it just be implemented and then we just need to live with it? Or will there be a process of, how can we learn to do these things? How can we learn to do governance actions, vote on things, etc.? But what I'm also really curious about is right now, the thresholds for the various governance actions have not been defined yet, right? It's not clear how many DReps, how much ADA needs to vote and all of that. So I'm curious how are these numbers selected, first of all? And then what happens if, they're implemented and we will never reach those numbers of ADA required to vote on certain topics? Will it just then be, do we just need to create another node version, update it, and do the old version of governance, or what's happening there? And funnily enough, right, if we look at, I know it's different, but DeFi governance on DeFi protocols where you vote with tokens, token-weighted voting, it's oftentimes that these governance proposals don't meet the threshold, and that's like one of the main reasons that it doesn't happen. So who will, or will we have enough votes? Will we have enough interest in governance from the, let's say, normal ADA holder that they even care about that? Yeah.
Thanks, Nicholas. Einstein.
Oh, yeah. Okay. There are some nuances to what Zoe debated, so I thank her for those. But I want to highlight a few things, like how would we keep track of all the voting history? Like an average ADA person, would they be able to query it on chain and track all of these things? That for me is something natural on a platform. The other is like, are we going to track and make a reputation? How will we show what people voted? And is this important that we have some form of reputation creation? And then, like, are there competences required? Like, should a committee member have some knowledge of the security considerations, or should the platform also have some form of a debate of what will be the security implication of doing this change we're doing? I feel it's natural some of these votes require some form of competence to be able to really form an opinion, and this should be presented to the voters somehow. And the same with the vote itself. Like, how would an average person be able to submit through Cardano CLIA vote? Like, we need to have some teaching material on this. All of this ties into having some form of platform. I fully agree we can't like aggregate all of the data into this platform, but it's so natural to me that we need to think about like, how do we educate, where do we do it, and it should be some place that people know we go here to do this. So I'm not fully sure like what this should consist of total, but definitely there should be something, and there's many arguments for why, as I've exemplified now.
Right, Thorsten.
Yeah, thought which strikes me is actually one which kind of is stipulated by what Stephen has done lately. The question is, how do we deal in this context with ethics, and how do we kind of deal in this context with unethical behavior? So, I mean, the voting in itself is perhaps kind of an expression of something which happens outside of the system of the voting in itself. And what happens if that is unethical? And what implications would that have? And I don't see, I mean, there is a notion in there on the one hand side, but it's just really on the side of the committee, on the SPO side and the DRep side, that I didn't see that. So that would be my question, kind of, how do we deal with ethical concerns?
That's a great point. And we have 7 minutes till the top of the hour in our break. So Juana and Zoe, do you guys want to take us home?
Hi, guys. So many good points here. Honestly, just like I'm listening to everyone, though, like, it's very hard for me to truly think that everything is decentralized, because I can't envision, like, there's just, like, from the MENA community, for example, there's only maybe 200 of us, 5 of us that even maybe know remotely anything about what's happening. And I think that's a big concern, because if we're saying decentralized governance, like, I don't see any support or like any thoughts about how we can actually make sure we've onboarded those like minority groups or like those parts of the world where their voice isn't even, they don't even know how to even be involved, you know? And it just falls like on, it's a great responsibility for those representative community members to have like that responsibility of representing this massive amount of people that have no idea, like, that they will be somehow involved in the future or whatnot. And I think like already everything's segregated. Like, I'm listening to all the problems and concerns and everything that are coming about, and it just seems so North American like focused, you know, like, so it's just I'm curious to see if somehow there will be efforts towards balancing out the voices, or making sure that there's enough voices that are being involved from all around the world, from all the parts of the community, in a decentralized manner. I don't have the answers, but that would be kind of my question, is like, what efforts can we put to make sure that we're actually representing most parts of the world if this is supposed to be truly global, you know? But yeah, thanks for the good discussion.
Yeah, great point. Yeah. And Zoe, you want to take us to the top, and then we'll have a little bit of a break after.
Awesome, thank you. And also thank you, Juana, for this, and also Einstein for your concerns. The thing that I raised about this communication stuff inside the community would exactly mean that we feel a responsibility for not just voicing your own opinion, but also elevating those that you know of, and maybe like provide more stuff. And this is of course, it would be awesome if there would be an open, like one platform. But as I understand it, that would be another product by AOG. So we could wait forever for that. Or the CF made the forum for facilitating some communication. But apparently not everybody vibes with that format or something. But yeah, so yeah, just to bring that point maybe home. I feel like this communication stuff is, yeah, that would be, maybe it's all just the responsibility of DReps or something, but like you'd still need to be aware because DReps would have literally cash delegated to them. So yeah, most probably at least. So yeah, back to Nori, I guess.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, Zoe. I mean, you guys all bring up some really great points, and this will lead into kind of the wrap up where we want to come up with some most elegant next steps. What are the next sessions going to be? What questions should we be asking? And we can maybe start to put those on the Miro board as well. But does anybody want to start, volunteer a summary of their room and some questions that you want to bring back?
I'm happy to go first, so it's fresh in my mind.
All right.
Okay, so we were in the Constitution Committee room, and we tried to address 3 different topics, really around the Constitution itself, around the committee, how the committee is structured and organized, and then what rules are governing the committee. One of the first ways we started was to say that for the CIP, as this goes through, to really make it explicit that we've chosen the constitutional path as the first experiment. So it's an acknowledgement that this didn't just happen or come to fruition by happenstance, but it was a deliberative decision at the expense of other ones. And so to that end, we said, okay, well, if we're going down the constitutional road, then we at the same time need to allow other experiments to happen. So people to come to the table with something different than constitutionalism that may work. And this is really important for communities that maybe have different ways of thinking and different ways of governing themselves. And so we thought, if we want to be truly global and we want to be truly diverse, it's not enough to just say, okay, this one size fits all solution is for everybody, but we have to be able to experiment. We also had some concerns with how the committee in its current state is being formed, and a select group of members to go into with IOG and the 3 kind of big entities to discuss this. And we thought, maybe some more opportunity for community engagement, involvement, and who decides who sits on the committee, what process to get on the committee. These are all details that we thought would be very valuable to know and start working out. And then just the last one. And then, and then we said, okay, well, maybe we should be looking at, not everyone's going to have the same sort of values. So as we look to develop a constitution or a system, we need to maybe set up a process where different values can be brought. People can identify, self-select which values they identify with, and how that would kind of direct them and help them find others in the community that kind of align with their way of thinking. So I think that was general overview. I didn't take any notes, as I said, so that was kind of out of my head. And the question that we had a few questions to come back with, but the one that I suggested, and so I'll just say here, is how do we ensure that by selecting constitutionalism now, we're not locking ourselves into like a predetermined or an indeterminate ending? And also, how can we integrate maybe a milestone checkpoint where we say, okay, we're selecting this, but at this point we're doing a stock taking assessment where, we have some parameters or measures that we're going to be able to say, okay, this is how much we've done, and having that built into the system so it doesn't become stagnant over time. And then the other questions were, how is the committee formed? How does it govern itself? And who gets to decide who participates? So I'll stop there, but I think if people can, if anyone has other comments, feel free to jump in.
So thanks, JP. That was a really great summary. Any other comments or reflections from the Constitutional Committee room? Nicholas.
Yeah, I have a question when it comes to who decides who's going to be. Do you mean on the first Constitutional Committee? Because in the future, everyone can propose a new Constitutional Committee. So I think you mean probably the first one, right?
Yeah, because I think it's important how it starts. So whether it can evolve into something else, whatever it starts from is the place it evolves from. So we shouldn't be indifferent to the way that original committee is set up in the first place.
Thanks.
Vanessa, you have a question, clarification, or do you want to talk about your room?
No, I was just going to say about that question. It's not just about the first one, though, is it? It's also about what the process is and defining that. Because, we decide on the first one, and you're saying that anybody can propose, but I don't know that. I don't actually know that it says anything about anyone can propose a new constitutional committee. I don't think there's much in the CIP about how. So I think that's still up for grabs, is what that process would be, unless anyone knows stuff I don't. Please say.
Very good point. And do you want to talk about the inclusivity room, or give a short summary of that?
Okay, I'll do that. I can do that quickly. We had a really wide-ranging discussion, and we've bunged it on the Miro board. And I don't just want to go and read the Miro board, but I really think everyone should, because I think it's really good to refresh your memory and check out what other people were saying. But the questions that we thought we could end with and bring back were, first of all, what can we do to ensure that there are processes in place to ensure inclusion, and that it's considered and that it's thought about? How can we embed that? Also, massive question, how do we fund it? Because doing that inclusion work costs. And then there was this important question of how can we ensure that people feel that their vote counts? Because it is on the basis of how much ADA you've got. And a lot of people who are excluded don't have a lot of ADA. And if we're going to them going, you can participate in governance, and they go, okay, how much ADA do I need? And we go, more than you've got. It's not surprising people don't want to get involved and engaged. So we talked also a lot about, things like linguistic barriers and how we reach people, the flow of information and where it's coming from, how a lot of it is kind of at the moment coming from IOG, and how we overturn that. And we ended up with the question of maybe some of this stuff, particularly about how we fund it, is actually part of the MBO. So maybe that is where the MBO connects with CIP-1694, possibly.
Thanks, Vanessa. Nice summary. Any other thoughts from the room? If not, can somebody from the DRep room give a summary or want to talk about what you did?
Sure. We mainly had two different topics. One was around, because it was DRep, it was obviously Catalyst DRep or Cardano DRep, and then it gave a bit of a short story of where that iconic name came from and how it has been evolved in the discussions over time. And on the other side, where we were considering, how do we mitigate the whale power? For example, if Binance chooses to be a DRep, or if now some ethics are introduced, then how do we make sure, deeds or something, then surely they have enough people to decentralize their staking power to still take control of our committee process. So, that was a hard topic. Joey shared a bit his experience and where usually this comes up, having bylaws for DReps would be one way to have some kind of way to make sure that we have proper DReps. But it's quite a strong place, because then what it means is we need to start enforcing people and rules, and everything we write, we need to kind of be very clear about what we're expecting out of people. Yeah, these were the two main topics from my side.
Thanks, Timo. Any other thoughts or opinions from that room that people want to share? Einstein.
Yeah, I just want to mention Tivo also brought up the point about this stale votes. So like you keep delegating to someone and this DRep is not active anymore. Like, yeah, we have enough mechanisms in place for this. And one nuance when it comes to this collusion or a partnership is that it's much easier for an entity with 10 or 30 people with a high number of ADA to collaborate, and this vote then has much more power, and it's easy for them to propose, and it's also easy for them to reach this threshold. So these security implications of how we currently have DReps and how collusion or even openly collaboration will work was important topics.
Nice, thank you. anything else? If not,
SPOs.
Yeah, the SPO room. I can start, but Tommy, do you or Kawai want to jump in and give any thoughts?
Did you do notes?
I took some very briefest of notes, but yeah.
I mean, I have only a few. So we talked about pools in general and also this loophole thing that I mentioned before. What if they just block? And could we prevent that? And personally, I see them as one of the most powerful group from all three. And is that a good thing? Probably yes. Then we talked about what if the stake collaborators, or let's say, the bigger ones, like exchanges, other entities, should they vote? And can somebody prevent that even? I mean, how could you prevent Binance from voting? You cannot. And if you want that, who should decide and who controls that? And this whole thing, I mean, this is an old discussion. But we went down there, and then we talked also about entities that have a lot of stake. And should they be excluded from governance or participation in any level? And is that possible? Right? It will be probably. I mean, you could set something in the constitution, for example, that founding entities cannot participate. And then the question, of course, is: do we want that? Is that clever? Can you enforce it? And then we came to this Class C question, one ADA, one vote. And is that a good thing? Nori, did I forgot anything?
I think you covered most of the points. Yeah, because we started talking about exchanges and whether they can vote. And then it went to the founding entities, the big three, should they be able to vote? And then the question of, if we're trying to be truly inclusive, are we saying no to them? And what does that mean? And what does it mean when you have a voice that is easily a majority if you decided to participate? And how does that balance? It's a really tricky question. And if it isn't addressed up front and we either say no or yes or whatever, then there's always that kind of potential that there's a veto voice. Even though we have this whole decentralized governance model, if somebody holds billions of ADA, they can essentially walk in and have this fail-safe veto to say no if something's going sideways or wrong. And do we want that? Will that kind of hamper our governance mechanisms if someone has that strong of a veto power? Or should there be one? Maybe it's a helpful mechanism, but those are all really good questions that came up, and not necessarily SPO related, but yeah, our conversation kind of ranged all around. But yeah, I think Tommy, you gave a really good summary of that.
I did have a question actually regarding the stake pool operators. Is there a mechanism to know if someone operates more than one stake pool, and what happens for multiple stake pool operators? Like, do they vote with all of their different stake pools, or was that mentioned anywhere how that would be tackled?
No, but as an SPO, it's pretty easy to run multiple stake pools. And if you set up with different stake wallets and all that, it's really, unless you look at the IP addresses and where the relays are and what's shared, it's really hard to tell if someone's doing multi-pools. And then there are others who look like multi-pools, but they're actually running separate stake pools for different communities. They're essentially running stake pool as a service, where they do the technical side, but not the front end side. So it's kind of blurry.
But do you think that's going to be like a problem?
Yeah, it's one of the gaps right now in terms of ensuring the future decentralization of the network. But it's a hard problem to reconfigure the way SPOs are organized. So one issue is whether SPOs should be required to have some kind of digital identity. That would be the first step. You'd have to require a digital identity. And so there's a lot of there's both technical and value issues as to on the issue of multiple stake pools.
Mm-hmm. Thorsten, and then Tebo.
I actually have more of a question than a statement. Does anyone know how much of the delegated ADA is actually going to waste because the stake pool operators don't mint any blocks? Because my assumption is just being a stake pool operator in itself might be not just the criteria, or do we have a clear statement? I mean, it says SPOs, but I can say I'm an SPO because I've spun up effectively, technically, a node which could mint, but I don't have enough delegation to my stake pool to actually proactively participate, meaning minting a block. Does it mean just because I have technically fulfilled the requirements of a pool that I'm already legit? Or if not, so if the minimum requirement is you have to have minted a pool?
Torsten, my understanding is that the mechanism for how governance actions are transacted using DReps will be based on the same technology.
Not DRep, SPOs.
Yeah, it will be based on the same technology as the DRep, as the SPOs. Now, but you're asking a question specifically about how SPO involvement in government action voting.
Yeah, what is the criteria? So if I were, for example, technically spin up 5,000 pools, but none of them is minting a block, am I qualified to participate?
I mean, I need to maybe someone who's.
If you weren't,
yeah, sorry.
If you aren't minting any blocks, then are you actually contributing to the network? So does it really matter which version of the protocol or what changes you add to it?
I mean, as Tommy says, it's not relevant to what you're staking because it's a different. I mean, maybe Tommy wants to explain better than I do.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this was also your question, but in general, I mean, this sounds so harsh, right? But for the protocol, if your pool has no delegation, no stake, you're really not relevant. It does not count in the hard fork or on the blocks you would make. And the question is that clever or not? Because I would say it's by design like that. You don't want to have so many stake pools. Technically, we already, from a protocol level, right? I'm not saying this is good or wrong, but for the protocol, we have too many stake pools. The protocol at the moment wants 500 stake pools. This is what the K parameter should be. And this idea is that they shut down everything that is more than 500, but we will never get to that number. Because every day someone stands up and says, okay, I have this great idea, this great brand. I will now come with my pool and everybody will just delegate to me, which is good.
I get it. K is a parameter, and that's kind of the target which it should be. But the reality is there are over 3,000, right? And probably there is a majority of them which probably mint a block every blue moon, or never minted a block, or minted a block effectively 10 epochs ago and kind of just play on the luck factor. So what does that mean at the end of the day in conjunction with the SIP?
I believe with the SIP, the SPOs, their voting power is their delegated kind of ADA. So the more that delegation they get, the more. So there is a saturation limit too, but I could be reading that wrong. It's been a while since I dove into the mechanics of how that works, but
I think that's what I was just asking and got confirmation on. Yes, it's weighted by your stake. The SPOs vote is weighted by their stake.
So whether you mint a block or not is not relevant?
No, that is also weighted by your stake.
Yes, but there are lots of pools which more or less don't even mint a block because the delegation to the pool.
I think that's an open question right now on Thursday, whether you have to mint a block to vote, right? That seems like a question that we should be asking. Yeah.
So what I'm indirectly asking, what is actually the criteria
to vote? Yeah.
To vote as an SPO.
Right. That's a good question, because I don't think the SIP provides clarity on that. Or if you have to mint a block, or if you have to have certain stake threshold.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's got to be some accounting for that, because so many of these stake pools, assuming they're not unstable and in danger of just shutting down and retiring, but so many of these stake pools are going to be the future for communities around the world, right? They're going to get jobs, even if they're not ADA heavy and minting blocks on the protocol. They're going to be the access vehicles for Hydra heads and side chains. And I don't think that there's too many stake pools. I think they're necessary, and there's going to be a lot more, regardless of what K is.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think stake pools themselves, you have to have the technical knowledge to actually register, create the keys, and do the right things on chain. And there's a minimum 500 ADA registration fee that gets locked up for the lifetime of your pool. So there is a minimum entry. So somebody won't just stand up 5,000 stake pools unless they really want to lock up that much ADA. And then there's the whole delegation issue in order to get the voting power. But if you look at the current on-chain protocols,
I'm just looking at deep pockets in itself and say, okay, so how would someone be able to play the system? And the one answer is clear: it's a delegated voting power, which in itself kind of like doesn't really make a difference. Yeah, whether you put that into one pool, or if you have more than the 60 million, whatever it is, and spread it out onto 70 pools, at the end of the day, that's your voting power, right? Because at the end of the day, you are becoming the collective for the individual voting power, which is related to every single stake pool. Okay.
Nice summary. Evo.
2 points. One, on the voting side, I don't think there actually any kind of restriction as of now. And the point of this SIP is to actually ask what are these parameters of minimum and any kind of limits of who can vote. Right now, it just says that you have to register and you have to deposit an amount, which have no minimum request. And another thing we mentioned, I'm actually not worried that somebody is coming in and then putting 2 billion worth of ADA, then voting. And my assumption is that this voting, what he does, it has to be minted block. Else it's like you cannot duplicate from several minted blocks, but if it's not created blocks, but if they're not validated per blockchain, then you're gonna have you can have duplicates of the same power aggregated together. So I assume there is a need for Epoch to end the read all the validated blocks. Now the also question is, okay, right now it says that the committee will be most likely to be still the remaining foundational people who are currently holding keys and probably they will be minting more keys for trusted members from community who are able to actually understand what's going on in the Cardano protocol. Because but now the question is, if it's a technical thing, is it instantly enforceable? So as soon as the clock ticks and then the parameter changes comes in effect, does it automatically have an effect? Or are we going to use all of this, what we're seeing here, as like an advice? Like, this is what community wants, this is what SPOs want, this is what DReps want. They all come to these kinds of conclusions. Now, as a community and as a committee, do you now go further with this decision, or actually, no, this isn't reasonable, and we have like a great debate why we shouldn't change this parameter into this? And I would actually say the Constitutional Committee is a bit of, again, maybe a bad name, because that's what assumes that this is like the committee of the program of these rule setting. But what we are actually, we need like committees of technical stuff, governance stuff, decentralization, all the like different elements of committees. And one committee member may not know anything about the protocol level, but he has the expertise of, I don't know, social understanding or political power in registrational settings. So there's like many things to differentiate here.
Thanks, Devo. Some really good points there.